Welcome to the Property Pendulum, brought to you by Domain and Fear and Greed, the podcast that tells you which way the property market is going to swing and how to make the most of it. I'm Michael Thompson, and I'm joined every week by Alice Stolz, National Property Editor at Domain and one of Australia's foremost experts on all things real estate. Of course, known to audiences right around the country because of her work on Nine, including The Block. You have been very busy. Hello, Alice.
Hello, Michael.
Alice, spring selling season. In fact, 2024 in its entirety is racing to a close, which might sound very dramatic, really, doesn't it? But it's been a pretty unusual year, hasn't it, for house prices? It's been less of a two-speed market and more like a 3 or 4-speed market, with some cities booming, some just cruising, and others actually kind of falling backwards a bit. And all of that has had an impact on buyers, on sellers, and what's happening every Saturday at Open for inspections and at auctions. So today, we are going to delve into this in a little bit more detail. We have a special guest joining us today, Alice. Ewan Morton is the Joint Managing Director of Morton Real Estate, a Sydney-based agent who, it must be said, has his ear to the ground right around the country. Ewan, welcome to the Property Pendulum.
Thank you for having me.
Are we... I know I started very dramatically with this whole racing to the end of the year, but are we finishing 2024 with a bang, or are we just kind of limping towards the finish line?
Well, that's a very good question, because we're always asking the question, are we going to run up to Christmas? So does everyone pack up and go home, or do we go hard? And my feeling at the moment is I think that we might be running up until Christmas. The reason for that is probably more that we have vendors that want to get things sold, and there probably has been, there has been a pullback in buyer activity. So that's the interesting bit to it. Normally, it's the other way around, where buyers want to get done by Christmas, and they'll pack up and go home because it's all been too exhausting. So I think that there's definitely still deals to be done out there, and vendors who have a preference to sell. And that's probably the key message for buyers, is there are vendors out there with a very, very strong preference to sell.
I think also, Michael, it's important to be mindful of the fact that, we started this year anticipating this mortgage cliff that kind of didn't eventuate in the way that people expected it to. House prices rose in a way that people didn't anticipate. However, obviously buyers have felt more constrained than ever. So we have had all these things play out that's left people sort of getting to this point towards the end of the year thinking, oh my God, how did I actually get here? And my plan's gone completely skew if, and what I wanted to do hasn't been able to happen for a variety of reasons. So some people are kind of going hard to get things done before the year end. And I think we are definitely seeing others hold back, thinking, I'm going to put this off to next year when there's hopefully more clarity and stability.
Ewan, can I ask you then, based on kind of what Alice has just said then as well, that a lot of things took us a bit by surprise this year, just things not necessarily going the way we expected. What are buyers wanting? What are they actually looking for? Is there an ideal property that is really kind of in demand at the moment?
I wouldn't necessarily say there's an ideal property, or probably an ideal property to them is a vendor who wants to sell it.
Yeah.
So, interesting listening to what Alice was saying there, because you had bizarre things happen. We had interest rates rocket right up, but the market rocketed right up and everyone was expecting it to go the other way. I actually think what's happening now is those high interest rates are starting to hit. So everyone's calmed down a little bit. And also you've got a lot of vendors who've jumped into the market wanting to take advantage of that peak. And what often happens is they're a bit too late to the party. And that's really what we're facing at the moment, where days on market are sort of starting to extend out. And so buyers are feeling that they have more to choose from, and they're very much considering what their mortgage repayments are going to be. And that's giving them a level of conservatism that's making them pull back. So, I think now we're starting to see the effect of those interest rates on the market is my take on it.
I think also what's playing out in terms of property types that are doing well, I think definitely the turnkey property continues to be quite strong in market, because those who want to buy are sort of the ones who probably are erring on the side of wanting things shored up. And I think the issue is obviously a property that needs to be renovated. We've got massive planning changes taking place, particularly in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane at the moment. We've also still got that increased cost in renovating and delays and the uncertainty about what's ahead, I think. Just off the back of the US election, there's uncertainty about the future of the economy. So I think people are really quite spooked off renovators' delights at the moment, and definitely in the Victorian market and particularly parts of the Sydney market in particular, we are seeing stock that is well renovated being easier to sell than the ones that do require a bit of TLC or a bit of an action plan that's going to take a few years to come to fruition. And I think that's where the good buying is at the moment. But a lot of people are really under the pressure of not being able to borrow that money. So they're the ones that are particularly holding back.
Does that match up with what you're seeing, Ewan?
100%. So you can still get good prices. Like, this is the other twist to it, is that you can still get a good price on a property, but it depends on what that property is. So like what Alice was saying about the turnkey properties, definitely they can be well competed. But I think the key is how you price it. So a lot of it, we just had our sales meeting this morning, and my message to the team was, I think that we are 10% down on expectation. I'm not sure if that's down on actual prices. That would play out over the next little while. But definitely you've got vendors that have got expectations or hoping for numbers that aren't there. So we've got to pull those expectations back. And if you're selling something, you almost need to go with, very much with comparable sales. And then also look at, well, particularly if we are in a declining market, if you're priced too high with the number of buyers that are out there, which is dropping, they just won't look at it. So you have to be very careful about how you execute your campaign if you want to get a good result.
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing instances where some people are living like it's 2022. And I think, and their expectation is that they're being bullish in what they think prices will do. Whereas forecasting for now, and again, that can obviously change, it is actually quite moderate in terms of forecasting even for the year ahead, knowing that we have seen such an explosion of house prices over the past decade. We are apparently now going to enter a period of just a bit more sort of a slower ebb and flow of price rises.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily a bad thing for transactions, because people can feel confident they can go out into the market, sell what they've got, buy what they need. Whereas when it's really hot, it's very difficult that people get very fearful of being actually locked out. So, it could be, from a transaction point of view, as an agent, this year's been fine. Things are solid. Like I would have said we've had a consistent year, which is a bizarre thing to say in real estate sales, but it definitely, we had a strong month last month. This month's looking solid. I think we're going to go up to Christmas. So from that point of view, it's good, but we have got more stock than we would normally hold at this time. And I think that is because vendors are trying to jump in. And for some of those vendors, it's not an easy path, particularly when they have this strong preference to sell. So when I say that, there's something else going on in the background that's driving them to sell the property. So we're seeing there is a little bit of pressure out there.
All right. On the buyer side then, who is actually buying at the moment then? Is it upsizers? Is it downsizers? Is it first home buyers? Or is it those who are comfortable with where interest rates are at the moment, at these elevated levels, and are more kind of financially secure and sure of their position?
So it depends very much which marketplace you're in. So we cover a lot of Sydney. So we have got first homeowners out in areas like Penrith, and then closer into the city, it's more owner-occupied. Definitely a lot more owner-occupiers, and probably the people who don't need a mortgage.
Yeah.
So they tend to be wealthier and probably can afford to take their time. And particularly at the upper end, people don't necessarily need those properties. So they tend to see a little bit more variance in terms of price. So as, this sort of market plays out, people become more conservative. And if you're conservative and you've got the cash, well, you're sort of sitting in a pretty strong position.
I think also it's important to remember, and it's sort of a hard one to remember for most people, but there are still a lot of people who aren't playing in that mortgage space. So they're the ones that aren't impacted by interest rates. So definitely I think anyone upgrading now seems to be enjoying things a bit more, I suppose. Definitely what we're seeing though in Victoria due to taxation changes, when I say that I mean the increase in land tax, Airbnb levies, etc., is that sort of stock being sold off. So the market in Victoria particularly is flooded with pretty, B-grade-ish investor style stock. What you are also seeing, though, is opportunistic buyers coming in, kind of getting bargains there, knowing what prices are expected to do in Melbourne over the next sort of 5 years or so. So we are definitely seeing a really big dump of investor stock in Victoria, and those buyers are definitely heading to Sydney and to Brisbane in particular.
Interesting, very interesting, that comment, because across Sydney, I'd say one of the things that's absent from our marketplace is the investor. So we would have at one time sold half to owner-occupiers, half to investors, whereas now I'd say we're probably 15% investor. And some of those investors, actually, they're buying it to use later. So they're a delayed owner-occupier, if that makes sense. And a lot of investors, because what's happened is the rents have gone up a lot. There's no doubt about that. But mortgage rates have gone up even more. So with the flattening of the market, or in some areas, like some of that stock that you were just talking about, Alice, there's areas of Sydney where people have, say, bought off the plan and they haven't got their money back yet. So it definitely is a two-speed. Like there's some places that are suffering. And so what those landlords are doing is like, why am I funding this thing? So everyone complaining about negative gearing, well, it seems to be working in the sense that landlords are exiting it. And I think that's a worry. I'm concerned about that because you need to have those investors in order to be able to help with housing supply.
Yeah, the investor market's really intriguing one to watch. And I think, first of all, we know that we're still in incredibly low vacancy rates all around the country at the moment. So the tenants are finding it very, very hard. People are trying to imply that they're supposed to sort of be relieved that rents aren't going up as much as they were, which is true. However, they're still at record highs. I think also we're seeing, investors particularly priced out of that Sydney market. The Sydney median hit a new price high this year. So affordability is definitely impacting the market there. And we are seeing that sort of growth definitely pick up in Brisbane. But, that Brisbane market is almost on parity with the Melbourne market now. So even for investors, the prices have just got so much higher in Australia, particularly in those cities over the past year, that it's tough. It's tough for them as well.
Right, Ewan, we are running out of time. So I want to ask you, really, it's a kind of a two-part question here. So you've kind of said really that the vendors are wanting to get things sold. There's a bit of softer demand really from kind of broadly from buyers. What is your message to buyers then who are considering their next move? How do they best position themselves to get a good deal as we run up to Christmas? And then the flip side, you might have guessed it, is going to be from the seller's side, from the vendor side, how they make the most of the conditions that we're in at the moment.
Okay, so if you're a buyer, buy it.
This is the most straightforward advice I think I've ever heard.
I'll say this, because you talk to, yes, do you like the property? Yes, I do. Does it suit you? Yes, it is. Have you seen lots of stuff? Yes, I have. Have you been in the market for a long time? Yes, I have. All of that is that, well, then buy it. And I think that when it pulls back a bit, buyers get very conservative and they get anxious about that and they sort of start to take their time. Whereas I'm a bit like, if it's what suits you, if it fits your needs of what you're trying to achieve, generally buying a property has a housing need behind it of some sort. So if you've been out there, you know what you're doing, you've done your research, you see the thing, it's what you like, well, buy it. And you've probably got an opportunity to buy relatively well at this point in relation to, the extremes that we've seen. So buy it. And what happens is that buyers pull back. And for some reason, they all seem to make a collective decision on the one weekend to move forward and buy, and suddenly you're in competition again. So for buyers, take confidence in what you're doing and take confidence in what you know and get on with it. From a vendor point of view, really think hard about why you're selling the property and what you're trying to achieve. So I spend time having conversations around what is your goal and at what price can you still achieve your goal? Because sometimes if you're selling for less, you could be buying for less. So it's about changeover. You might be, putting money into an investment and, you knock a little bit back on your property, but you can still move forward with the investment that you're doing. So, you very, very much be clear about why you're doing it. That's the first thing. And the second thing is price yourself to the market as to where the buyers will find it attractive and breed the competition. The competition is what will push it up and gives you the best chance of getting the price, but you have to trust in that. And of course, human nature being as it is, a lot of vendors find that really, really difficult. So what happens is they go at a really high price thinking that someone's going to come forward and make them an offer, but they don't. So you have to navigate it. And I always say to vendors, we don't sell property as agents. You do, because you only sell it when you sign the contract. So don't get too overbaked about the whole pricing thing and just listen to what your agent's telling you, basically. And that's what will achieve you the best result in this market. And if you do it right, you can still get a good price.
Ewan, thank you for joining the Property Pendulum today. Some great advice.
I hope so. There you got a bit of a true opinion there. So hopefully that's helpful to the people who are listening to this.
It certainly is. That was Ewan Morton, Joint Managing Director at leading independent agency Morton Real Estate. Alice, plenty to consider there, don't you reckon?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think one of the things that Ewan touched on, which I think is so true, is that we are in this, and these are my words, I won't put them into Ewan's mouth, about being a dull market, but he was sort of talking about it being more sort of, a constant, stable market. And I think that's completely true. And I think for years we've sort of lived in this complete supersonic market, which has been turbocharged nonstop. And that is not sustainable, and it doesn't really help everybody. And I think we're moving into this sort of more egalitarian market, I suppose, and it's a bit more sort of fairer market. And I think there's less hate in it. This is a really good thing. It might just seem a bit kind of less crazy and not making people stop in their tracks. That's not a bad thing. So let's forget the sensational and actually think this is a more sustainable market, which will also really begin to reshape how we approach the issue of affordability, I think, in the years to come.
Yeah, well said. Thanks very much, Alice.
Thanks, Michael.
That was real estate expert Alice Stolz, National Property Editor at Domain. And I'm Michael Thompson. Make sure you're following the podcast, and we'll be back next week with another episode of The Property Pendulum, brought to you by Domain and Fear and Greed, the podcast that tells you which way the property market is going to swing and how to make the most of it.